It looks like garbage. A bag woven from reeds, stuffed with loose river stones, the fibers gone brown and brittle with age. It is about the size of something you would carry your groceries in. You could lift it with two hands. It is roughly 4,600 years old, and it is the single object that proved everything the world believed about the beginning of civilization in the Americas was wrong. Because that bag was never meant to be carried anywhere. It was meant to be buried, thousands of them stacked layer on layer, packed into the body of a pyramid rising out of a desert valley in Peru. What kind of people build a mountain out of bags? But the truth is stranger than the legend. Picture where you are standing, about 200 kilometers north of Lima, 23 kilometers inland from the Pacific, in a valley called Supe. On either side of you, grey hills of sand and rock. Nothing grows on them. Nothing has for thousands of years. Then the valley floor opens, and there is a green ribbon cut through the desert by a thin river, and rising out of that green are 6 enormous flat-topped platforms. The largest is about 150 meters across and 18 to 20 meters high. In front of several of them, sunk into the ground like an eye socket, is a perfect circle. A plaza dug down below the surface with steps leading into it. This is a city, 60 hectares of temples, plazas, workshops, and homes. Perhaps 3,000 people lived here, with maybe 20,000 more spread across a network of sister settlements up and down the valley. And for most of the 20th century, archaeologists walked right past it. Why would anyone ignore 6 pyramids? Because of what was missing. There was no pottery, not a fragment, not a single broken bowl, not one shard of a cooking pot, anywhere on the surface of the entire site. In archaeology, that usually means one of two things. Either the people who lived here were desperately poor, or the site was older than pottery itself. Almost everyone assumed the first. One archaeologist had spotted the mounds from the air in the 1940s, another mapped them in the 1970s. Both moved on. There was nothing here worth the funding, nothing worth the years. So the city waited a little longer. Now imagine you live here, in the middle of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. Your morning starts before the heat does. You walk out of a house made of stone and mud plaster, painted white or pale yellow, and the smell in the air is smoke and river water and fish. Fish, in a city 23 kilometers from the sea. You eat anchovies and sardines that were caught yesterday at the river mouth, dried and carried inland on someone's back. In exchange, the people at the coast get something from you that they cannot live without. Cotton. Your fields, watered by canals dug from the Supe, grow cotton, squash, beans, guava, and sweet potato. The cotton is spun into thread, and the thread is knotted into nets. And without those nets, the fishermen at the coast catch almost nothing at all. Think about what that means. The people of the mountains and the people of the sea were each holding one half of the same machine. Neither half worked alone. Down at the river mouth sits the settlement that supplies you. It is called Aspero, and it was dug in the 1970s by an archaeologist named Robert Feldman, who found platform mounds there too, right on the shore, surrounded by the discarded shells and fish bones of a community that lived on the ocean. For years that fed a genuine argument among specialists. One camp held that Andean civilization must have been born at the coast, where protein was free and abundant, and that everything inland was a later spillover. Caral complicated the picture, because a monumental inland city with irrigated fields was rising at the same time as the coastal towns, not after them. The current view leans toward something more interesting than either extreme. Neither side built this. The relationship between them did, and not everyone in that relationship was equal. Look at the houses. Some are small and packed together at the edges of the city, single rooms of cane and mud. Others are large, well-built, and sit right at the base of the great platforms, with their own hearths and better food in the refuse. Someone here was closer to the fire than you were. Your afternoon is work, not the work you are imagining. Nobody here is dragging carved stone blocks. Instead, you and everyone around you weave reeds into loose open bags, walk to the hillside, fill them with rock, carry them back, and set them into a retaining wall in careful courses. The bag holds the stones hold the wall, layer on layer, generation on generation, the platform grows. It is astonishingly clever. It lets ordinary people build a mountain with no machinery, and it lets the whole community build together, a bag at a time. And in the evening, you go to the amphitheater, a sunken circular court, room for a few hundred bodies, with an altar for sacred fire at the center and hidden shafts running underneath it to feed the flames air. When the fire is lit, the smoke draws upward and the sound begins. Buried in that court, archaeologists found 32 flutes carved from the wing bones of condors and pelicans. Beside them, 37 horns made from the bones of deer and llama. Some were incised and painted with animals and human faces. Sit with that for a moment. A city with no pottery, no metal tools, and no weapons had an orchestra. And it had a calendar. Standing near one of the plazas is a single upright stone, set deliberately in the ground, positioned in relation to the horizon and the movement of the sun. It has no inscription. It does not need one. If you know where to stand and when to look, a stone like that will tell you when the year turns, and when the river will rise, and when to put seed in the ground. That is what a temple was actually for. Not decoration. Timing. So how do we know any of this is as old as it is? That answer belongs to a Peruvian archaeologist named Ruth Shady Solis. She came to the Supe Valley in 1994 from the National University of San Marcos in Lima, looking for something everyone told her would not be there. She was not deterred by the missing pottery. She thought the missing pottery was the point. The problem was proof. Stone cannot be dated directly, neither can mud. Radiocarbon dating measures the decay of carbon in things that were once alive, so you need something organic, something that grew, something that can be tied to the exact moment of construction rather than dropped there later. Then her team pulled open the retaining walls and found the reed bags. Thousands of them, woven from plants that had been cut, used within days, and sealed inside the pyramid forever. The perfect clock hidden inside the building it was built to raise. In 1999, she sent samples to Jonathan Haas at the Field Museum in Chicago and to Winifred Creamer at Northern Illinois University. On the 27th of April, 2001, the three of them published the results in the journal Science. The monumental architecture at Caral was already under construction by 2627 BCE. To understand why that number detonated, hold it next to a date you already know. The Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza was built somewhere around 2600 to 2480 BCE. While Egyptian crews were laying the foundation courses at Giza, people on the other side of the planet, who had never heard of Egypt and never would, were raising platform mounds in a Peruvian desert. It pushed the origin of urban life in the Americas back by more than 1,000 years. It meant complex society here began before pottery, before maize agriculture, before metal. UNESCO inscribed the sacred city of Caral Supe as a World Heritage Site in 2009. But the date is not the strangest part. The strangest part is what has not been found. No fortifications, no defensive walls, no stockpiles of weapons, no bodies showing the blunt trauma and blade wounds that mass violence leaves on a skeleton. No burned layers from a city being sacked. Across decades of excavation at Caral and its neighboring sites, the signature of warfare simply does not appear. Now understand why that unsettles people. For a century, the dominant theory of how states are born ran roughly like this. Population grows, land runs short. People fight, winners take land and labor from losers, and to hold what they have taken, they build hierarchy, armies, taxation, and kings. War in that model is the engine. Civilization is the exhaust. Caral does not fit the model. What appears to have organized these people instead is a shared religion, a shared calendar, and an economy that was structured as a chain of exchange rather than a chain of conquest. The temples were periodically buried and rebuilt bigger as ceremonial acts of renewal. Everyone had a role in raising them. Here, honesty matters more than a good story. Only a fraction of the wider valley has been excavated, and absence of evidence is not the same thing as proof of peace. Some archaeologists argue that competition and coercion in early Andean society are simply harder to see in the record than we would like. Others point out that a society organized around religious authority is still a society with power in it, and priests are not necessarily gentle. The debate is live. What is not in dispute is that after decades of digging, the weapons and battlements you would expect to find are not there. There was no writing here either, no script, no inscriptions, no carved names of rulers. But in the residential quarters, excavators recovered lengths of knotted cord, which they identified as a quipu, the knotted string recording system the Inca would later use to run an empire of millions across thousands of kilometers. If they are right, it would make record-keeping in the Andes older than almost anyone had guessed. Some specialists remain cautious about identifying a knotted textile fragment that early with confidence, and that caution is fair. But the possibility is remarkable on its own, a city that never learned to write, keeping its accounts in thread. So what happened to it? Around 1800 BCE, the great centers of the Supe Valley were abandoned. There is no destruction layer, no siege, no sudden violent ending at all. Instead, the evidence points to something slower, and in a way, worse. A prolonged drying of the climate. Rivers thinning. Sand blowing in and taking fields that had been irrigated for 600 years. Layered on top of that, the periodic violence of El Niño, which in this part of the world means the ocean warms, the fish disappear from the coast, and rain falls in a desert that has no way to absorb it. Cut the fish, cut the water. The chain of exchange that had held two ecosystems together for centuries simply comes apart, link by link. This is roughly the same window in which severe aridity is documented across other parts of the ancient world, and you will see it linked to troubles in Old Kingdom Egypt and to the fall of the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia. Whether all of those events share a single global cause is still argued over by climate scientists and archaeologists. It is enough to say that these people, on their own coastline, ran out of water. And yet here is the part that most retellings get wrong. They did not vanish. At the site of Vishima, closer to the coast, Shady's team uncovered clay reliefs showing emaciated human figures with their ribs visible, and a toad-like being associated with the coming of water. That is a community recording its own famine on a wall, and then recording hope. At Peñico, another successor settlement, excavation continues, and in recent seasons, the team has recovered caches of ritual figurines showing that the ceremonies did not stop. The people moved, they rebuilt, they carried their gods with them, and they carried their architecture with them too. The stepped platform paired with a sunken circular plaza does not die at Caral. It becomes the grammar of Andean sacred building for the next 3,000 years. You can walk into Chavin de Huántar more than a millennium later and find that same sunken circle waiting for you. The knotted cord becomes the quipu that runs the Inca road system. The irrigation canal that fed Caral's fields runs past the site today, still watering farms in the Supe Valley. Even the humble reed bag has outlived its makers in an unexpected way. Peru sits on one of the most violent seismic boundaries on Earth. A solid stone core would crack and topple under that shaking. Thousands of loose bags of stone, stacked in courses, behave differently. They shift, they settle, they absorb. Engineers who have looked at the Shikra walls have argued that this is part of why these platforms are still standing after 4,500 years of earthquakes, when far younger and far grander buildings around them are not. Now look down at what you are wearing. If there is cotton in your shirt, you are holding the same fiber that built this city, and the same fiber that, 4,500 years ago, was more valuable than any weapon anyone here owned. Not because you could kill with it, because it was the thing everyone else needed, and needing each other was the whole design. That is the reframe. You have been taught in 100 quiet ways that civilization is what happens when somebody wins. Caral is a serious, dated, excavated argument that at least once, on a river in a desert, civilization was what happened when nobody had to. So go back to that bag, a loose net of reeds, filled with stones nobody shaped, carried by hands nobody recorded, buried inside a wall nobody signed, not a monument to a king, not a trophy from a war. Just one person's share of a mountain laid down beside everyone else's and left there in the dark for 4,500 years until it could tell you what it was for. It was never garbage, it was the receipt.